think everybody should have their food now, so we will plan on getting started again with our lunch speaker. At these symposia, I always think there's value in taking a few minutes to reflect on why it is we do the work we do. And so we like to have a speaker over lunch who just serves as a great reminder, a strong reminder to the importance of the work that we do. And I'm so pleased this year that we could have Dr. Stephanie Starcher with us today. Dr. Starcher is the superintendent of the Fort Fry Local School District in Washington County, and I've gotten to know her from I don't know how many meetings I've been in that she's in, and she is just an incredible advocate for her school district and school districts really throughout Appalachian Ohio through her work with the Coalition of Rural and Appalachian Schools. And I'd say her advocacy for the schools only pales in comparison to her advocacy as a mother for the needs of her daughter and her children. And she really lives both sides of this equation, somebody who's there serving children and somebody who's there trying to access services for her child. So I'd like to invite Dr. Starcher up, and then we'll let her talk. And then if anybody has comments or whatever, I'll circulate around afterwards with the microphone. Thank you.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here at this symposium with you today, and I want to thank Randy for inviting me to share our family story. Before I get into our family story and how we have navigated the mental health system, I just want to make a few comments about some of the things I've been thinking about this morning as I've listened to the speakers and heard the various comments. So I'm going to put my school administrator hat on for a second. As we recruit the workforce, I really go back to the comment I made earlier about advocating for the importance of internships in a career technical education way in our high school. I know that I was listening about how the one speaker said that Teresa, I think it was, said about how you had to be 18 years of age, and as far as like the billing and the legality part of it. But I do think there's some things that might not cross the bridge of HIPAA issues and confidentiality that those students could be associated with in prevention type work, even if it's just handling things that a coordinator or a secretary or somebody might do in the field, just so that they get a glimpse into what that field looks like. So, as Claire was saying just a little bit ago, instead of us coming to, no, we can't do that, and I'm not saying that anyone is, I challenge us to go away thinking about how can we do that? How can we get around policy, or how can we advocate for policy so that we can start to get our younger students, particularly in Appalachia, because they're the most likely to come to Appalachia. I don't know if you all have heard, but tons of young people aren't flocking into Appalachia. So we need to recruit our own, and I think being able to do that through career technical programs, whether it's at our public high schools, our career centers, is definitely something we need to advocate for. Schools are a huge partner in the mental health services for our kids because, as many of you have highlighted, the kids are already there. If they won't agree to allow you to meet with the child, or they hesitate to reach out to you, a teacher that they trust can make the same recommendation and is a lot more likely to get them to sign the services for agreement because they trust you, the teacher. They trust the school. I heard someone say, Doug said, as a provider, we have a difficult time sometimes through educators accessing kids. And then I heard a teacher say, well, we'll let our kids go. And I'm going to tell you that there are many, many teachers who will prioritize the whole child's needs over academics any day of the week because they see the importance that if we don't meet that fundamental basic mental health need, that we might as well forget about teaching biology. However, I've been a school administrator for 22 years, and there are some teachers who will make it difficult for kids to miss their class or make the administration or the child or the parent or the provider feel like it's an inconvenience to access the child during the school day. So I think both exist, and we have to work on how do we educate our teachers to understand and they're seeing this, the importance of mental health, of the impact trauma is having on our kids. And to me, we're talking a lot about tier 2 and tier 3 supports. I always go back as a school administrator to tier 1, to universal curriculums, because I don't know about you, but at Fort Fry, my pyramid's upside down. Like, I have too many kiddos at our district who need tier 2 and tier 3, and I want to make it so that our tier 1 is rigorous enough and universal enough that less kids need tier 2 and tier 3. And I know most of you in this room are the tier 2 and tier 3 folks, but I really think we got to back up, and part of this conversation is, how do we partner with schools as young as preschool? I sat back in the back with Justin, and he said, yeah, I'm talking to my preschool teachers, and they're telling us that the kids, they're coming with behavioral and mental health issues like we've never seen before. And so we can't refer all of those kiddos to a tier 2 or a tier 3 support, but we can work on providing those social emotional learning programs in our schools. I had to chuckle this morning when Teresa said, we try to promote social emotional learning, and unfortunately it's become politicized. Absolutely. I wanted to shout out and say, amen, girl, because I fought this battle with one of my own in Fort Fry, that they were concerned about what we were teaching in the name of social emotional learning. And we have people that were very closely scrutinizing our universal social emotional learning program. I know in kindergarten through 5th grade, we have adopted caring school communities for the first year. And the idea was that we spend time with children in small group talking about our social lives, our emotional skills, how to be a friend, how to be kind. Can you believe that? Like, we're not worried about math and science and social studies. We're actually letting kids be kids and talk about those things. And we're starting to see a difference, because instead of the conflict that we were seeing as much, we're starting to see kids from that those class meetings being able to communicate and solve problems with one another better. So I wanted to make that comment. And I did want to make the comment as another thing I think we can do as educators and as service providers and advocates is the Ohio Department of Education did develop the Whole Child Framework. I was actually a small part of that process. I know our Fort Fry team is sharing some of our wellness practices at their next webinar. But I think that we've got to do a better job in education and in the mental health field of making sure that parents and schools and providers are aware of that whole child network, that providing mental health and behavioral health services to our kids on the campus is not just okay. The state is telling you it's a whole child. It's not how well can they score on their ACT. It's not can they just graduate from high school. It's the whole child. And I think that we can use that framework to say we have to have those tier 1 supports in our classrooms. Those were just my thoughts from this morning, and I wrote them on a note back there as Justin and I were talking. So I'm going to return to the regularly scheduled program that Randy asked me to do. And what I said was not endorsed by Randy or the ACC. It was Stephanie Starcher's comment. So, I've been a school administrator for 22 years in Washington County, and the last 10 years of those, I have been the superintendent at Fort Fry Local School. So from my experience in education, which totals 27 years if you count my teaching experience, I would say I'm keenly aware of the mental health issues that surround our kids in Ohio. About 14 years ago, I was a principal in another district, and I remember going to, a little over 14 years, I remember going to the assistant superintendent, who was a gruff, straight-laced, stern kind of guy, and I was a little younger. I was a little intimidated. I've lost my filter since then, so I wouldn't be intimidated now. And so I go to him, and I had this kiddo in our elementary school, and I really thought he needed mental health supports. Now, you got to remember, 14 or so years ago, for a school system to speak up and say, Johnny or Susie needs some mental health supports and I want to provide them at school and we might have to pay for them, was unheard of. The challenge of how do we fund these, how do we make it work, was even greater then. And it was unheard of to have that conversation. And I remember what my supervisor said to me. He looked at me and he said, Stephanie, absolutely not. We are in the business of education. We are not in the mental health business. Now, over the last decade, 14 years, the question of how to provide mental health services and how to fund them still remains. I have that conversation with outside contracted agencies, and I also have that conversation with my own school district. But one thing that has definitely changed since that time is that we are 100% in the mental health business as schools. And if anybody thinks differently, they need to go find another job outside of education. Although I've worked with many families to help them secure counseling and other types of psychological services, I also feel like I've learned the most about mental health and the mental health system by helping my own daughter. I'm going to share part of her long 4-year journey with you with her permission. As a toddler, and I will say up front, if I get emotional, bear with me. As a toddler, our daughter was a ball of energy. She had a fiery spirit, much like myself. She was fun, always laughed. She was hard to self-soothe. I definitely remember that when we brought her home from the hospital. In elementary school, our daughter loved to be around people. She loved kids, always had lots of friends. She liked to play sports, and she was really good at that. She did great at school, and she liked to go outside and be outdoors. I also noticed throughout her elementary school years that our daughter had a hard time paying attention, and that regardless of the emotion that she was feeling, her emotions were always intense. And then she continued on into middle school, and at the beginning, she was still successful and involved in many sports and many extracurriculars. Adolescence hit, and her moods become more unstable, and her behaviors more risky. Now, I know you're sitting there thinking, well, welcome to the teenage years, Mom. Or you're probably thinking about your own teenager who, shifting moods and risky behaviors are very common in the teenage years. Well, we didn't know, as Mom and Dad, if this was just part of, wow, she's going to be a rough teenager, or if it was something more concerning. We would soon get our answer, because in February of 2019, when our daughter was in 7th grade, I got a call from my daughter's school asking my husband and I to come to the school because my daughter was expressing suicidal ideation. Now, you got to remember, I am a superintendent in another school system. I've helped so many kids deal with suicide ideation, self-harm, navigating the mental health system. Later that evening, my husband and I were at home with her, and she continued to express intent to self-harm. My husband and I, we were confused and we were scared. We never thought we would have to deal with this with our own daughter, even though I had helped many kids. So we decided to take her to the local emergency room. And this would be one of many, many trips to the local emergency room over the past 4 years. Again, the year was 2019. We waited hours to see a clinician that night because there was only one person available on duty in the county. And after they evaluated our daughter, the clinician too recommended that our daughter be placed in a stabilization unit. At the time, I really wasn't familiar with what a stabilization unit was. Now I could write a book on one. And I remember my husband and I frantically Googling late in the night as she slept in the ER and we sat there with her about stabilization units across the state of Ohio, reading reviews, reading your comments, and then I remember looking at all of the, considering some of the comments and thinking, oh, hell no. But we knew our daughter wasn't safe to bring home with us that night. We really wanted to get her into some place that we felt was safe. And so to us at that time, name recognition was very important. We need her in the nationwides of the state. We need her at Ohio State. We need her at the Cincinnati Children's. We couldn't get her in. We really tried. So we decided on a place out of state that had good reviews. And it was nearby some family members. And going through this for our very first time ever, that was really important to us. So she goes there. And I keep thinking to myself that could be one of the most ill-fated decisions I've ever made in my life. While in this facility, our daughter was sexually assaulted by a peer. We weren't told about it because she didn't tell anybody at first. We were later told that it happened when a staff member left her and a peer alone to go help with another situation because they were short-staffed. When she was released, our daughter came home far worse than she was when we took her to the stabilization unit. And it took some time for us to know what had really happened to her in that facility. And once we knew, we started to understand the down-spiraling cycle that she started next. In the next few months, through the spring and summer of 2019, our daughter would seriously start to self-harm. The means in which my daughter self-harms is so dangerous and scary that her cutting up her wrist and arms, legs, that require a significant amount of stitches no longer alarms my husband and I. To us, that may be a somewhat safe but negative coping mechanism. Our daughter has repeatedly tried to overdose on medications. This has landed us in intensive care units. Our daughter shot herself in the stomach with a pellet gun. Our daughter has run away from home with strangers that she met on Snapchat and been missing for 36 to 48 hours with us not knowing if she were alive. Our daughter has beat her head off of concrete when she's dysregulated that she knocked herself out. And this is just to name a few of what our daughter has done in order to cope with how she feels inside her brain. Our daughter has been in and out of crisis hospitalization stays all over Ohio. And at this point, I don't expect that we're going to get some significant breakthrough. For us, it's physically keeping her safe. My husband and I have gotten really, really good at navigating the mental health system. We know that if you take her to the Marietta ER and she hasn't self-harmed enough where she needs surgery or is going to have to be life-flighted for medical reasons, we know that we won't get transferred in to the Cincinnati Children's, the Akrons, the Nationwide. We know that we're going to get placed in a stabilization unit that will take her. And after what we experienced in the first stabilization stay, you can imagine how hard that is for us. These stabilization units, as many of you in this room know, take kids through their own ERs first, and then their geographic catch area. Southeast Ohio, Washington County specifically, Belpre, Ohio, where we live, is not in the catch area. And we sometimes aren't able to go to the local ER because the police may force us to get the psychiatric eval nearby. We have decided as parents that sometimes it is worth the risk to put our daughter into our private vehicle and drive her to Nationwide or drive her to Cincinnati Children's ER, where we know once they see her state, she will get admitted to a stabilization unit that we trust. Imagine having to take that calculated risk with your teenage daughter who's severely unstable. One night, I remember, and it's just not one night, it's been several, but on one particular night, I remember it was about 9 or 10, and she had run away. She had self-harmed, but she wasn't going to need immediate medical attention. And my husband and I decided we were going to drive to Cincinnati Children's ER because that's where her outpatient psychiatrist and DBT therapy center is. And so I remember my husband putting the kitty locks on the doors and windows, me sitting in the back seat holding on to her tightly, just making sure that as we drove to Cincinnati, our daughter didn't jump out the moving car and try to kill herself. She had to use the bathroom. I remember thinking, she's going to try to run from me. I remember having my husband, Jeff, open up his car door, stand in front of the car door, walk with McKinley and I into the bathroom. In the bathroom, holding on to her in the stall, standing in the stall with her, going with her to the sink, having my husband stand outside the bathroom. All because, as mom and dad, we wanted to make sure that our daughter got the best level of care in an inpatient stabilization unit and that she was safe wherever she was. Many, many times, our family has taken this risk in a vehicle going to Cincinnati or Columbus to ensure that she's accepted at a facility that we can live with. And now, when we do go to the local ER because we're afraid to transport her or the local law enforcement makes us, we spend days waiting on a bed somewhere. Not hours, days. 3 weeks ago, it was 3 days. No food. We managed to bring that in. Somebody has to manage to stay with her. The room has no windows. It's sterile. If the bed is not comfortable, it's not what one would need in self-care. There's no psychiatrist or counselor that stopped by to see how she's doing. There's a security guard that stands outside the door to make sure she doesn't self-harm or hurt herself or try to run away. And my husband and I take turns going back and forth, seeing her and staying with her. You know, Teresa talked about the workforce and misworked. I wanted to yell amen again because I cannot tell you the amount of time my husband and I have spent away from work dealing with our daughter's mental health crisis. We have it, no, it's your turn. No, it's your turn. He's, by the way, with her today, so I could be here with you. As you can imagine, crisis stabilization units are not the most intensive level of care our daughter has received. And people will say, well, all kids have a hard time accessing various levels of mental health services, not just kids in Appalachia. And they will talk to you about the demand and the shortage. But there's one bottom line that I always mention when I talk to legislators, including the governor, our senators, our representatives. They don't have geography against them, and we do. And that's a huge difference. When my child is located clear across the state, I have to travel. I have to pay gas. I have to eat. I have to be away from work. I have my other daughter. It's not like I can run over after work and see her. I can't run over and take her to that appointment. Luckily, my husband and I are middle-class, educated parents, and we've spent a lot of time researching all the services that are available throughout the state for our daughter, who has multiple mental health diagnoses. She's benefited from the support of some people in here, like Doug, as well as the county wraparound team for Family and Children First. She has an IEP, and I work with the school system in order to help them to be able to provide some type of education for her, because school is a monumental task for our daughter. The majority of mental health providers say that our daughter needs intense dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. And I'm sure those of you who are providers are familiar with that. Well, if you go throughout Washington County and Southeast Ohio and try to find a provider for juvenile, intense, dialectical behavior therapy, not much is available. There's already a workforce shortage in mental health services. We didn't even touch upon specially designed services. We're talking about services in general today. When you start looking at very specific therapeutic treatments, you find a greater challenge in the workforce and access altogether. Our journey led us to McLean Hospital, a nationally renowned DBT partial hospitalization program in Boston. We tried for 2 years to get our daughter accepted to the residential program or to their outpatient program. And each time, for various reasons, we were denied. Finally, after the 2 years, she got accepted. And the county helped us with MSY funding to pay for this prestigious day program, which would be 4 weeks, Monday through Friday, for our daughter to attend because insurance wouldn't pay for it. So our family, once again, made the arrangements for a parent to miss work and to be away from the other child. And one of us was going to stay in the hotel with her while she attended the day program and then be there at night and on the weekends for the four weeks. 1 year ago today was a Sunday evening. My daughter had completed the first week of the outpatient program in McLean, and I thought it had gone pretty well, though she said it was tough. I didn't know my daughter was having one of those dysregulated nights because, like many times, she doesn't tell us. As I was parking the car by the hotel, she managed to slip away from me. We were staying in a suburb outside of Boston. I frantically started calling and texting my daughter. I had that sickening feeling that a parent gets when they know something's bad is about to happen with their child. I decided that the best thing for me to do, rather than call 911 and have them come to my hotel, was to go and find the police station and tell them what was happening, because they needed to understand the whole history of my daughter's mental health and why we were in the Boston area. So I managed to find the police station, and I told them what was going on. I begged for them to help me find her. She had gone, in the meantime, to a local CVS, purchased a bottle of ibuprofen, which she's done before, and started taking the pills in an attempt to slowly overdose. Much to my amazement, she found the subway. Someone paid for her to get on the subway, and she headed downtown toward Boston. In the meantime, the police are with me. They're pinging her phone. They're knowing that she is on the subway headed toward Boston. Once downtown, the medication started to kick in for my daughter. She is not coherent, and she wanders around downtown Boston, and we know this by security cameras later, until she meets an evil middle-aged man. This man coaxes my daughter to come back to his house to get warm for the night so you can figure out what you're going to do and you'll be safe, while he also gave her some types of street drugs, which made her completely incoherent. I'm going to spare you the details of what happened to my daughter and what we went through that night. I don't even know that I could go through it up here. Thank God she was able to eventually call me from her cell phone in his basement, where I coached her on what to do, and the local police were able to find her, and she ran to the lights flashing in a neighborhood. Ironically, on Friday, as I was preparing for this speech, I got a call from the Boston District Attorney, and he wanted me to know that the guy had pleaded guilty to raping my daughter, and he would now be sentenced, as he has already served a year of his term in jail waiting for the trial. I wish that my husband and I did not feel like we needed to go to Boston to help our daughter and to get her those DBT services. I wish we didn't feel like we were on a race against time to save her life. I wish Washington County and Southeast Ohio had DBT therapists all over the place and child psychologists available within 30 minutes of a child's home so that I could go right after school and I could not miss work and I could take her for her appointments and she could get to know these people on a personal level instead of always through telehealth or always going out of the state or always going 2 to 3 hours away. Don't get me wrong. I am thankful to God that every day my daughter is alive because I know it's a miracle. Although we have had many months where our daughter is regulated and living a somewhat normal life, I wish I could tell you that she's doing well right now. Like Teresa said this morning, it's a journey. She isn't going to miraculously heal from this, and we understand that. 2 weeks ago, she climbed on our second-story roof, which she's done several times, and was threatening to jump off. My husband took off from work today, as I told you, so that he could be there with her, and so that he could attend the telehealth appointment that she might get into PHP at Nationwide for 3 weeks. And this time, we hope she won't run. I'm not here because I want you to feel sorry for our daughter. I'm not here because I want the sympathy for our family. I want to bring facts and a personal story to life. I want you to gain a deeper understanding of our experiences, given our wealth of knowledge and our income level, and how hard it has been for us, particularly in a system where there's workforce and geographic challenges. Most importantly, I share this story with you because I want you to remember my daughter, and I want you to remember her name, McKinley. I want you to connect to what she has been through so that when each one of you leave here today, you can be reminded of how just important your work is and the urgency there is in getting our kiddos in Appalachia more services and more help. There are so many kids in our communities like my daughter. Some are worse, some are better, but a lot of them don't have a Stephanie or a Jeff as mom and dad and don't have access to the resources that can help them. I've made a vow when we got deep into this journey that I would use McKinley's wounds and our hurt to help others, and I plan to continue to do that. We all play a really important role in creating more and specialized services for our kids. I challenge you all to keep up the good work and never stop fighting for our kids like my daughter. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I'm always so blown away by your willingness to share and to make your challenges a part of an effort to make change in the world. So thank you. We do have a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, comments, anything you'd like to bring up. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's a hard story to hear. I think one of the questions I have as an organization that's trying to build the programming for the youth in this region, what else should we be thinking about building in terms of supporting the parents? You know, what in this process, what else did you need and your husband need and your other daughter? What other things should we be thinking about building in that space?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot what I got one right here. That's a great question. You know, the supports are non-existent for the parents, almost. You know, this is sad to say out loud, but I actually am in a social media support group for parents, and the wealth of knowledge that is there. They share a lot of resources from NAMI and different articles. And there's the NAMI class that caregivers, there's different ones that caregivers can take. And so I think as a profession, we would need to advocate and tell parents, you know, even if it's as simple as handouts, here's some websites that have good parent resources for the type of mental illness your child has, or here's a support group. You know, we have been told Al-Anon or different groups would be something good for us to attend as caregivers because the type of skills that is needed in dealing with addiction and caregiving is similar to what would be needed for our daughter, because, you know, her addiction is self-harm. She doesn't cope, she self-harms and runs away. So it's very similar as far as how that functions serve. I just think, you know, I say to myself a lot of times, when I retire, I'm going to start a parent support group for this and whatnot. So I think just saying to them, hey, are you connected to your county, blah, 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 blah. What about this resource? And making sure that that's part of, if you're an inpatient facility, part of the discharge. If you're an intake facility, as far as outpatient therapy once a week, let's say, saying the same, having suggestions. Okay, we're going to be dealing with your child in this situation, but what are you doing here? You know, we would have providers ask about myself and my husband and our daughter, but and provide a few things, but I think there was more for parents than there was for the sibling. We required our younger daughter to go to counseling, and we just forced the issue, and she is a teenager too, so we were horrible parents, she told us. And we said, well, if you don't like it after 5 tries, then you can quit, but you're going to go 5 times, and we just arbitrarily picked that. And so she didn't think it was so bad once she went, but we do see how it's obviously impacted our other daughter. So I would just say having that toolkit available, whether it's on your website, your handouts, and in your intakes and conversations that follow up with families.
Anything else? Questions, comments? Okay. Well, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And we will start again about 1:15, right? So you can take a few minutes. We'll let them kind of clear plates and stuff, and we'll get started about 1:15. Thank you.